So I'm using the garage. My mother's garage is a sort of a semi-storage space. And that's about it. So, we do this and then we can go in the house and I can show you some other things. When I'm in New York with Sabia, we work down here. This is our kind of working space. Sabia now is in Fargo, North Dakota. Lucky her. Let me give you some background music, which would be normal for a day, something like this.
It's kind of easy to listen to me.
Yeah, so, I don't know, Eric Satie was French or Belgian?
Yeah.
There you go, French influence everywhere, all the time. And this is basically my workspace with Sabia. This is an old table from my father's office from 30 years ago. And basically my archive is sort of in front of me and also in boxes here and things like that. Some cameras, so it's a combination of Sabia and my stuff, but mostly my things. And we sort of work down here and do the things we do as photographers and publishers. And we have a metal board there, a smaller one of course, and this one for working here. Right now there's just calendars and other things on here, but generally when we're making a book, we have this whole board filled with the photos and making arrangements. And then they stay up there for months and months, if not a year, working the sequences and things over cups of coffee. And we find that when we get up in the morning, we may have some inspiration and change one photo. If we change one photo in one day, we're oh, what a great successful day we're having. So we're trying to work that method there as well. You mean to have like a conversation?
Yeah.
Talking
Yeah,
sure.
sure.
Okay. So you mean you'll like interview me?
If you like to
You will do it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no music.
Okay. We're thinking, but when we think we're thinking words. But actually, according to Aristotle, we're thinking in images. And so, for me, the images will always stay because it's part of being a human being. It's part of, all life. Anything that has eyes, images are very powerful things. And so they will never leave us. The form might leave us. The books may morph into only online things or something like that, which is fine. For now, the book has staying power, and the book has existed past the internet. So in some ways, we feel like the book will always be here, but perhaps in some years the book won't be here. But again, it probably doesn't really matter. Images will always be here. My name is Jason Eskenazi. I'm from Queens, New York, and we are in Queens now in my mother's house, where I have most of my archive. And I would say, I started photography perhaps in high school when I got a camera. I think my father bought me a Cavalier camera, it was called, with a 50mm lens, and I shot some photos for the high school yearbook. And I think there was the first time I understood the importance of photography as a way to get close to people. I think I was very shy. I probably continue to be shy, but so that was a way to get close to people. And I think this sort of developed slowly and slowly, working for small newspapers, say in Queens, and then working for photographers as their assistants. And then finally, I think really it took me a long time. In my 20s, I kind of wasted that, but at the end of my 20s, I went to Berlin when the Berlin Wall fell down. The Berlin Wall certainly drew me, and that was the drawing thing of to go abroad. I think that growing up in the Reagan era, Ronald Reagan era, was always about the evil empire in the 80s when I was in my 20s, and that influenced me a lot about wanting to see how the other side lives. So I kind of went in a very photojournalistic mode. I remember before I left, I had the green Robert Capa jacket. I had, the pockets, the 70-210 lens on this side. I had the Leica here, and I was ready to go as a sort of photojournalist. And I did work for the New York Times occasionally and Time Magazine and did things like that. But I soon found out I was a horrible assignment photographer, and many editors can probably attest to that, is that I think only always wanted to do my own thing. And so I went there and I slowly saw the former Soviet Union as a story that I can connect to. I don't have any ancestors from this place. They come from Saloniki, Greece and Turkey, but somehow I was drawn politically, historically to this place. When I was at university, I studied 19th century literature. So of course, besides Balzac and other people like that, I also studied the Russian authors, which are steeped in the 19th century. So I sort of had this story arc in my head. And I went to Moscow with this in my mind, this kinds of stories. So it was not necessarily the story of what was happening historically, but it was sort of a story that I was also slowly creating myself, which was a mix between myself and the environment that I was in. And that started Wonderland. I was looking for stories, not literal stories of journalistic things, but larger stories that you may see in cinema that unfold over the course of 2 hours. So for me, the book is a thing that unfolds over the course of however long it takes for a viewer to look at it. It's the same as sort of a movie. So for me, this was always in my head. About experimental psychology, I sort of was very good at predicting animal behavior. So I don't say humans as animals, but predicting behavior in some environments. And that is actually good because you could be in danger and you need to know your proximity to people and what will happen and how you can trust people or not trust people in these volatile, dangerous situations. I don't go running into war, but I have certainly been in war zones. I was in Ukraine a few times last year. And so all these factors help keep you safe and also to find what you're looking for. There was a rocket attack, there were drones, and it's, your heart beats very quickly. But again, it's you're acting on your instinct, which is good in a way. Most of our lives we're wondering, where am I going to get my next coffee, and stuff like that. And then we kind of live in a very relaxed environment. So, so in some ways this stress is good. It's not stress directed at you particularly. It's not, no one's sending a rocket into my pocket. I just may be in the wrong place at the wrong time, which friends have been over the years, who were killed in the war zones. But there's a certain, excitement, let's say, about that. And not to only go because of the excitement, but it exists when you go to these places. And about safety and about wearing flak jackets when we go and helmets into certain places. I mean, generally when we're driving in a car, we have the flak jackets and helmets in the back. But when we cross a certain place, like, oh, we're 5 kilometers from Bakhmut. Stop the car, everyone take a piss somewhere, and put on your helmets, put on your flak jackets. And that, it becomes very tenseful. When you're driving through these places, how dangerous is it? I don't know. I mean, it's just happenstance and circumstance. You may be hurt, or if there's a drone above you, and we listen for drones and stuff like that. After some years of shooting, I was going back and forth from Moscow, say, to New York, spending a few months there, coming back, or 4 months, and then more or less, and always coming back to New York to develop my film. So I started to just accumulate lots of images. I mean, I can discuss a little of the beginning of Wonderland, say. These photos need to be in something, and a book, okay. But how to make a book? What does that book mean? And so something clicked in my head early on, and I think it was in 1995, and this is already 4 years or so that I had been going back and forth to the former Soviet Union, going to various republics and things like that, that I was also reading at the time fairy tale theory, um, specifically by Bruno Bettelheim, theorist. And he wrote that there was a structure to all fairy tales. And for me, I took this structure and I put it on Wonderland because I saw the Soviet people as sort of like the children and the Soviet state sort of like the parent that had died. In all fairy tales, the structure is that there's a child, usually a girl, whose parent figure dies, either mother, father, or grandmother, and then that child is set off into the world, generally the forest, to encounter the evils in order to maturate and become a woman. So when I was discussing the point of a fairy tale where a parent figure dies, I found this photo from Russia in the book. And a blackbird, I think, in many cultures is the portent of something bad's going to happen. So again, I'm using sort of a Hitchcockian thing of something's going to happen in this book. And so I started to follow taking photos from my archive about how to create the fairy tale. So here the parent figure dies, and here the child is left on their own to go in, and of course animals and fairy tales. And then the book just follows a female figure, though it's a different female figure all the time. It's a female that morphs into other females, but the project is sort of about that happening. So for me, the Soviet Union sort of was a metaphor like that it was sort of like, as I just described, the children, the Soviet state dies and the children are off, the Soviet population, the Russians are off on their own into this world of capitalism, say, or whatever. And so I structured the fairy tale and the book like that. So it's called Wonderland, a fairy tale of the Soviet monolith.
But never demand or patiently waiting till then. The life you deserve, but never demand. Patiently waiting till then.
So for me, there was a natural graduation from fairy tales to mythology. One is for the children, so to say, and then mythology is for the adults in some ways. So because I was in this ancient Greek world, which Turkey was part of, and many of these places, I thought to kind of look at some mythologies very loosely again, not so intensely, and the book is not a literal translation of any kind of mythology, but also as, you know, as most Greek plays are made, is that there's a chorus at the very beginning telling you what's going on, and I found the chorus. So I thought to which photos I didn't specifically go out, say I need to shoot a chorus, but I had that already in my thing, and I'm just pulling things that I have, that I know that's in my archive out. So, oh yeah, I need to go there. Oh yeah, that box I think has something there, and I would look and find what I may need. So for me, it was gathering the photos and then putting them together in some method. I'm an observer, and I go places to observe and to make photos. And what's presented to me is due to where I get access, and what I'm allowed to shoot, if it's a sensitive thing, and what looks good even. I mean, I won't publish a photo just because it's important. Oh, that shows that these people were killed in this spot, and it's a bad photo, but I have to show it to prove a point. I would never do that. I would work with the material that I like, that I think are good photos, in order to create something which I don't know what it is in the end. I'm not creating something that I already know the finish line. I'm creating something that's drawing me in. Like I mentioned, I'm looking to see what the photos tell me, and I'm putting them together in a certain way. If one person looks at it who's pro this or anti that, they may look at that and say, look, here's something I'm going to use for my own propaganda. I can't find the photos that I'm looking for. Let me explain one thing here. I mean, for instance, about playing is that about sequencing. I found this girl. She was in an old kind of farm in northern Kazakhstan. But I looked at her face, and she had this kind of milky, kind of clean face. And I thought, okay, oh, don't I have another photo of a girl that looks similar to that? And I said, oh yes, there she is. And then for me, this girl morphs somehow into that girl. I think I learned at some point, I can't pinpoint exactly when, that there are two factors in making a good photo. One is geometry, and then one is sort of empathy, let's say. So the geometry, of course, we go around with this rectangle around our necks and we put that out in the world. We have to know where we want to put this rectangle, what we want to include, what we want to exclude, and how we want to work the frame. And so that's one thing. But then, of course, we're not shooting architecture. We're shooting people generally. And so we want to have those people as humans in the frame creating some kind of story. So I'm always looking for, say, geometry and gesture. Geometry and gesture. Positioning myself in a certain location, anticipating, like experimental psychology, anticipating where to stand always. So I find myself always 5 meters away, 3 meters away, using a 35 millimeter lens, sometime later using a 28, but generally those are the two lenses I always used, and always finding my way how to position myself with the things that I want to photograph in anticipation of a moment happening. This is really all I do. You have to allow for your unconscious to work into the sequence. That's why when you wake up, it's the best time to sequence, because you're not awake yet. You're just sipping your first cup of coffee. You're getting that first jolt of imagination, of thinking. So even in between that, you will say, well, that photo doesn't fit there. I don't know why, but it doesn't go there. I need to move that. And then you did your work for the day in some ways. So for that, then, you have to just trust your imagination and yourself to do things. If you have the story already laid out, forget about it. You're never gonna make a good book. You can play, you can identify things. What is my first photo? What is my last photo? How am I gonna get from the photo one and 80 photos later to the last photo? What ways am I gonna go in and out? To breathe in, to breathe out, the accordion in and out, the half notes, whatever metaphors you want to use for sequencing photos, you employ that. So I have this photo here, which is in a children's prison in Moscow, shot in probably 1993, something like that. But again, I'm looking at shapes and geometry, and I'm saying, oh, I have another triangle somewhere. That's strange. Wow, there, shot years later in a different location, we have a similar triangle of men, but now we have a woman inside. So I thought, okay, that's an interesting transition. Let's do that. And then I would say, oh man, I have another thing. Here's another triangle, sort of men, but the woman in the center turns into a stone. So for me, I was like playing with these ways to sequence, ways to move through the book. And this is the magic of sequencing. You start to sequence on a board, but then the sequencing and the shooting starts to happen simultaneously. So you're shooting and you're sequencing, so this process can take years. I mean, it took Robert Frank, I guess, 1 year to sequence the Americans, and I guess I don't know if he was doing it during the shooting, but certainly after it took at least a year. So I would say things generally don't happen one after the other, but they happen sort of simultaneously, of strands like DNA going through each other. So seeing what you have, shooting more, trying to fill in the gaps, going back and shooting and things like that, until you just give up and say, I'm tired, this project is done. And so for me, this is a good feeling, because you have to end the projects. You can't have them go on forever and ever. You have to move on and do another project. So I feel like my approach has always been the same, and it continues to be the same. So in some ways I can say I never learned anything, because I feel like I have to start again every time I go someplace. So it's not like I come with better knowledge. but you know, the time frames generally get shorter. So if a first project lasts 10 years, hopefully the second project won't last 10 years. You know, because if it does, you may only do 3 projects in your life. I think I learned how to manage the project in a shorter amount of time, coming up with a way to put them in a book. But actually the shooting, I think, always has to take its own time. So in the 10 years or so that I was in the former Soviet Union, going to most of the republics, traveling with friends, going to some war zones, you know, I came back to the US, you know, and there was a big lag period of where I was not working, not doing anything. At the time, I actually got a job as a security guard. So in 2009, I went to Istanbul because my relatives are from that region, you know, and so I started to think of a new project. I was doing then Black Garden. That name came to my mind somehow. I don't know how, Black Garden. And so I started to work on that. I mean, for here, it's like, you know, like you have the ball and you have the face. They're kind of in the same place in the photo, but it replaces that somehow. So and then it expands into the rest of the photo. I remember sitting with Larry Towell once in Moscow in the 95, maybe, 90, I don't know, 96 perhaps. And he was saying to me, you know, I think I asked him, how do you work on a project, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, you know, I get a box, I put a label on the box, and I just keep throwing the photos in that box. And then at some time in the future, the box is full and you have a project. And I said, that's an interesting thing. So the title always influenced me. I have many titles for books I've never done that I want to do. So my thinking is how to fill up those boxes with that title. And so Black Garden also happened in the same way as Wonderland. I just went with a kind of idea. You know, I didn't have the idea first, but it developed. And then I just started traveling. Instead of traveling in the former Soviet Union to Uzbekistan, Lithuania, and other places, I started to travel from Istanbul to Greece, to Iraq, to Egypt, and places like that. So in a way, it was the same exact thing, but in a different location. Tectonically, a different location. Just like before me was Latin America, then was the former Soviet Union, then was China, and then was Iraq, and then it becomes another thing. So I think at that time is that making something conceptual. So even though my photos, I would say they're very, you know, time and place. It's this war or that place or this place, they have historical value, and they exist on that point of being, you know, historical. But again, I wanted to take it to another level. The book makes it conceptual. So the book's the concept of the group of photos together. And for me, that's what's interesting, is that what's the concept behind all these things I'm putting together. It's not about one theme. It's not, oh, it's only Russia, or it's only this place or that place, and it's about that event or this event. It's about seeing how all these events sort of collide and coincide with each other. And in that way, I can have one photo on one side from Iraq, and then on the next page, something from Jerusalem, because they are somehow connected in some bigger conceptual story. And I like to sort of play with those things. Okay. One thing that I wanted to play with in the book is about time. So if I add up all the time that I shot these books, it's basically 30 years. It's basically from, say, 1990, 1991 until 2020. Even though I think I made Black Garden in 2018, but say you have about 30 years of a stretch of time frame here. So I was just wondering how to pull these things together, how to connect these books somehow, and how to make the 30 years seem like 3 minutes or 1 minute of shooting time. I guess if you add up all this shooting time, it's, you know, less than a minute perhaps of 300 photos. And so I'm trying to compress time. Now here's a picture of this girl in this oil field in Baku, in Azerbaijan. And then I saw later on the contact sheet that I pulled back a bit, including her brother. And it's the same girl in the same place. So for me, this is the first book and this is the last book. And I'm sort of compressing the time that only a moment has happened. And it's sort of just like life, that, time passes in an instant. So I wanted to make these books very like that fact of time just goes. Where has the last 30 years gone? I don't know. I'm 64 years old, and I said, I don't know. I still feel like I'm 28. So I wanted to sort of imitate how we feel about time. So I did that 5 times in these books. I matched different photos from the same contact sheet and put them in the various books in different places. That you have the exposition, which is the development of the characters and plot points, and then the crisis, and then the climax and the falling action. And so they were telling that books also, photo books, can also have the same sort of arc as a movie or any kind of dramatic thing about how people look through something. So I usually use this in workshops, about how to make a book, that we introduce certain characters at the beginning, certain situations, and then there's a climax and crisis point in the book somewhere, generally past the midpoint. So I feel like in that way we find how to edit and sequence imagery towards that climax and resolution. I also feel like something that's never addressed, or I've never seen anyone talk about, is not just the photos themselves, and this one is in Iraq and this one is in Jerusalem, and how they're connected, if they're connected at all. For me, not only are these photos important, but this space here, the space between the photos, is very important. It's almost like a synaptic jump from one image to the other. How do you get from this image in your mind to this image? So you're considering that there's a viewer looking at this photo and then going to this image, and they have to sort of formulate or think, how are they connected somehow? Is there some tenuous connection or not? And this is where the imagination comes through, and this is what the viewer brings to the book. It's not only about the photographer telling the viewer, hey, look at this is important, I'm so smart, look how I did this, look how I did that. You want the book to be open-ended, a place of mystery, so the viewer can jump in and make their own interpretations. You create some characters, some protagonists, and then you create some situations, and then you see what they're going to do. So in some ways, the protagonists take over the story, and the author is listening to where they want to go and what kind of situations they will get themselves into. In the same way, I'm open to going to places, taking pictures, and see where these pictures take me, and see what will happen with them. Everything is circular, so in some ways, the trilogy comes back to the beginning, so that's a full circle again. So that's a circle, or you can divide things, in threes. I don't know, they just happen naturally. When I was making Wonderland, I was never making a trilogy, or even 2 books. It just sort of, let me make a second book. A trilogy makes more sense. Let me connect those photos from one book to another book. That will be fun. Back in the mid-2000s or so, I was a very poor photographer. Generally I'm always poor, but I was very poor. So I decided to get a job as a security guard at the Met in order to make some money and get health insurance. So I got a job in 2008 there. And was, very close to the art, and it was inspiration, at the same time standing all day long, but there was some inspiration there. So I gave up photography because you're not allowed to photograph, certainly at the Met. You can't do anything. And after standing all day, I was too tired to go out and shoot. So actually I worked 6 days a week, and I was exhausted. So that's all I did for 20 months, being surrounded by all this art. And I especially was influenced by the European paintings. They had these altarpieces that folded on themselves. The altarpieces are somehow like that.
Hi.
And they close.
It's a triptych.
Like that.
Okay.
So you open them and they close. So the books exist in that same way, a sort of altarpiece. So they were 3 paintings that came together. Sometimes, of course, they were missing, and the Met didn't have all of them. Specifically, there was one altarpiece I know which the Met only had one one painting of, and that was called The Creation of the World by Giovanni di Paolo. So, but in any case, the Met has many altarpieces, can be just this big, but they folded up and closed each other. So I made the books exactly the same size as a central book, and then two side books that can close and are exactly the same size. But at that same time, near the end of my tenure, the Robert Frank American show came to the Met. I guess it was the 50th anniversary of that book. And so I started to guard that show. And I guarded that show every single day, as much as I could. And at that same time, I saw friends come in to the museum, because I know a lot of photographers in New York and in the world, and they came in to see the show. The first one that I saw was Joel Meyerowitz, and he came in and I said, "Hey Joel, what is your favorite image from the show?" Which is actually the book sequence as well. And he told me at another time what it was. And then I saw Kudelka come in, and then I saw this person come in, and then that person came in. And so it ended up that I asked hundreds of photographers their favorite image from the Americans and why. And that became the Americans list. So we have the list. This is an old version of it, an actual list. And then I asked them why. I used that to my advantage. I made the Americans list, actually. So I turned a kind of negative thing into something positive and made a book out of that. And then there are other things from the Met as well. This is not something interesting for you, but we made a magazine that was very anti-museum. Okay, well, not anti. The guards were very frustrated when I got to work there. And I felt that there were a lot of young guards. They were artists, mostly, who had MFAs in some place in the US. They came to New York to try to make it big, to try to get a gallery. They got a job at the Met, and you needed a college education in order to get a job at the Met as a security guard. And so they became very frustrated because they were producing less art but standing. And just like me, I was not taking photos for that time I was working. I was standing and exhausted. I couldn't do my art, let's say. The guards, a few of us created a magazine called Swipe Magazine at the museum, which gathered a lot of the guards' artwork and stuff like that, poems and paintings and photography. And we made this magazine, and we got a lot of publicity for it. We had an exhibition. The guards made money from their paintings and whatever, and artwork. And this created quite a stir at the museum, sort of guards against the museum. Mm-hmm. And somehow we won, because they reinstated this employees art show. After some years they didn't do it. So the guards then had more access to show their work as a guard. Mm. So in that way it was a very positive and political thing. I call myself not political, but in some ways I'm a troublemaker. The thing about the books and about bookmaking and about photography, it's about play. You may be even in a dangerous location, but you're playing with the rectangle, you're playing with ideas, you're trying to make the viewer interested. And again, the books are not isolated. The books are to be seen at some point by somebody in the future. Just like a 19th century Russian novel will speak to a viewer today. So for me, the book is the thing. More than an exhibition which goes up and comes down, the book is a staying power of things. The book has not disappeared, even though people thought it would because of the internet, just like records and CDs and stuff, internet. But again, it stays because the book is the important thing. The book is like an illuminated manuscript of days of old. You open this book in the church once a year, perhaps. It had these gold paintings. It was very delicate. So for me, the book idea is the same as the book idea was before, the illuminated manuscript. And they wrote why. So the book is less of a fanatic book about Robert Frank, because before this, I had never met Robert Frank. I had seen him on the Bowery walking with his cane when his wife June, but I never approached him because he's Robert Frank. And what am I going to say to Robert Frank? So it was only after this show that I met him during the opening and sort of started to become a bit of friends with Robert Frank, like, 1,000 other people are friends with Robert Frank. And so I'm about to publish the third and last edition with about 500 plus names and finishing this book. But again, the book is less about Robert Frank than about what the photographer chose. So the book, The Americans, is like an axis. And because it's the most famous photo book, people can relate to it. So by asking a photographer their favorite image from The Americans is like asking them, what do you look for in a photo? And so a good example of that was Ralph Gibson. So I asked Ralph, what's your favorite image? And, he chose what is considered a very boring image in The Americans, one that nobody would choose, called Salt Lake City Art House, perhaps. And it's just a vertical picture of a house with some stairs on it. And Ralph explained why he liked that photo. And he says, well, because there's a sphere, a triangle, and a rectangle. And isn't that what exactly Ralph Gibson looks for in his own photos? So I said, that's perfect. And so we have 500 examples of this, which is a great educational piece. I did try to ask the one person I thought that would never answer such a question. I'm going to try to ask Mary Frank, the woman who's in the last picture with the kids, Robert Frank's first wife, her favorite image. And I thought I would never get an answer. I looked on her website, she lives in Woodstock, and I wrote her an email. And she said, Jason, call me now. And so we, got to, know each other slightly, and she answered the question. But she answered the question as no person can ask. She's a total insider. And so she didn't see any theories, oh, this is Robert doing this, or this is Robert doing that. She just basically said Robert had no sense of direction. So you see this picture, which is the last picture in the book, has such metaphorical value for curators of the artist looking ahead, maybe abandoning the family, and what it means to the curator. But what does it mean to the actual person in the book, which is really a revelation, and she ends up to be the last written statement in the book. Now, I had one more experience, is that in those last years of his life, I got to know him slightly. I went to his house sometimes on Bleecker Street, but I always went with another person. I didn't want to be alone with Robert Frank because I said, what am I going to say to Robert Frank? I don't know. So for me, he was like a Picasso figure. It was just like sitting in front of the master. But somehow I ended up alone there one day. I don't remember how. But maybe I met June on the street, she said, come on in or something like that. So I'm in the kitchen with Robert Frank and June. And June says, I'm going to go get ice cream. And I said, oh, I'll see you in a bit. And then I'm sitting with Robert Frank in the kitchen and I don't know, what do I say to Robert Frank? I said and then I see my book on the table because I had given him a copy. And I said to him, Robert, would you like me to read from the Americans list? And he goes, sure. So I read the descriptions, a description of one of the photos. And then he would think, which photo is he describing? And he would say, Canal Street. And then I would choose another one and read the description. And he would say, oh, San Francisco. And things like this. And so I felt I was reading the fairy tale to the fairy tale maker. And this was a magic moment for me. And maybe the last time I saw Robert, I'm not sure. And then June came back with the ice cream, and then that was a nice, beautiful memory I have with Robert Frank. I want to shoot that as well. That we published, but we did more of those. Back when I was thinking about publishing Wonderland, I didn't know what to do, how to go about it. I went to drop my book off at various publishers, especially in New York. I also went to the Frankfurt Book Fair and I showed my work and people liked it, but again, I couldn't cross that threshold of like, oh, they want to do my book. So there was a kind of problem about finding publishers. But the impetus for being a publisher was that to have total control over the work, and we had the means to sell it and warehouse them and make them. So our friends were designers, photographers. It seemed like a easy, natural thing to do to have total control. The idea behind Reddick Editions is that the photographer has total control over their their product. When we were printing Black Garden, the printer said we wanted to dig this debossing into the book very deep at an angle, and the printer said it can't be done. But we did it with the help of the printer, and he was shocked that it came out like that. So for us, we want to try to create something that hasn't been done or something unique. The books are all, tactile. Here we have Sabia's book. Sabia and I designed this book with the help of our friend Bonnie, but we gathered the artists to make the cover. We did the whole editing. We chose the end papers, and we did all the sequencing and editing ourselves. So in that way, we made the book. But again, we stuck with, what we feel like is a good book, and something that has a feel to it and is an object. So the books should be a physically beautiful object as well. I would say work with a few people that you trust. They don't have to be photographers. Sometimes it's better to work with non-photographers about how they see the book, what they get out of the book, how they read it, And so I would, have some trusted friends to show it to, but also engage a designer to help you bring your idea up front. So the designer, I feel, should help the photographer bring the ideas out. It should be a collaboration. And when we work at Reddick Editions, we collaborate 100% with the photographer. We're trying to make the book they want to make. Not the book we necessarily want to make, but we want to make the book that suits the work best. And we need to find it through experimentation. We make some mistakes, but we finally come to the place where this is what the book design wants to be to support the work, not to override the work, because some designers over-design and the work gets lost. We want to support the work and have a unique design for the book. And when we come to that point, which sometimes can take a year, after 3 iterations, say you make a book, it's terrible, then you make another book dummy, getting closer, and the third, wow, this is it. Tweak this, tweak that, and then we have the book finally. But I also feel like there can be 2 parts to that, is that some things you do for money, but other things you don't do for money. It's like if you were a poet, you may be writing your poems at night under candlelight and you're doing it. Nobody's going to pay you. You're never going to sell one, and you don't even think to sell one, but you do it because it fulfills your soul. So you would never compromise on that poem because nobody's going to buy it. So in a way, I look at the work as like not as a sale item. I don't make a book to sell it and to make money. I make a book because I'm trying to listen to what I want to say, and I make that book, and hopefully after that I can sell it and people will be interested in it. But I wouldn't make a book just to sell, like a calendar about horses or cats, I wouldn't do that. And I wouldn't put advertising in a book, certainly, or say a magazine. Some people would come to me, you have to use this photo, else I'm not letting you use these photos. You have to say this or say that. And I would say, well, sorry, we're not saying those things. So we want to be true to what we think. A magazine like Dog Food it's free. We raise some money, but we don't, people don't tell us what to print. We print what we want to print, and that's it. So there's no compromise in those ways. And, but again, life has compromises, and, so it's not about being a purist. It's about where you compromise and for what. If a photographer is considering self-publishing, generally it's a kind of isolated thing, and I would say don't be isolated, because you'll make some mistakes and you don't know. You need other eyes on the book. If it's a designer or someone to help you edit, you need that, so you don't make the pitfalls of certain mistakes that photographers generally make when they're editing and sequencing. Images are much deeper based in the spine, in your brain. They come hundreds of thousands of years before language, and written language, certainly. So imagery is much more primordial to us than words. And images are in our dreams. We dream in images. And actually, there's a quote right here, which I usually use for my workshops, is that Aristotle says the soul never thinks without a picture. You know, that's amazing. Back in Istanbul, I was teaching a workshop, and I was a bit frustrated that the photographers were only able to reference other photographs, other photographers. Whereas I see photography sort of a medium that's connected to cinema, connected to literature, and connected to many things. It doesn't exist in sort of isolation. And so I asked the class, in a bit of frustration, I said, please, someone name me an Antonioni film, just to see, you know, Blow Up or this, Zabriskie Point or something else. And so no one can name one. So I said, okay, taking a break. And so that night or a few nights later, I got together with some colleagues, and we went to a cafe, and we said, you know, we need to create a zine, an educational zine somehow for photographers. And so we created dog food somehow. The dog is the symbol of the cynics, a bit of a cynicism, but again, you know, sorry. So the dog was the symbol of the cynics, and the cynics were Diogenes, and he was actually from northern Turkey. And so we decided to make a zine that had some educational things and free photographers. The first thing that we wanted to do was create a sort of 10-10 list, which was famous photographers telling their favorite films and favorite books that inspired their life. So we started in 2012, and once a year we produce an issue of Dog Food. It takes a year to make because we have to figure out a theme and then collect all the material, and we make a free zine. We have to collect money to print it. So this issue was like an all Ukraine issue. We were going to end Dog Food at Dog Food 10, but then I went to Ukraine and I found this album in a house, in a destroyed house, and then we decided we need to make a issue about Ukraine. And then we made a Dutch issue. My colleague Arjan is Dutch, and then we decided, okay, we're going to make one more on the 12th anniversary of Dog Food, or Dog Food 12, which is the 100th anniversary of Robert Frank's birth, and we're making an issue about Robert Frank. And this will be the last issue of Dog Food, number 12, which will come out this summer. I don't know what else this will. So, you know, when I was in college, I was both majoring in experimental psychology and English literature of the 19th century. And this is the man of the 19th century, Herman Melville, who lived in New York, who wrote Moby Dick. And that is the great odyssey of a man surviving the journey. So I was, even though he looks very stoic, he was a very cool guy. You know, so I still am inspired by, you know, this kind of novelistic approach to making books. And I don't have access to my books like you would have sitting by a fireplace and maybe looking at books and say, oh, these are my favorites. And even when we did the 10-10 lists for the Dog Food, we didn't ask about photo books. We asked about literature, you know, either fiction or nonfiction books. So for me, these are much more important than photo books. So anything by Philip Roth, you know, Kurt Vonnegut, and also, you know, just anything of the 19th century, you know, of the transcendentalists of Melville and you know, people like that. You know, they all those stories sort of meld together.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't remember what Bluebeard was about compared to what the Sirens of Titan was about. I don't remember. But of course, it's about the worlds that he created, you know, the amazing worlds. And I had seen, actually, Kurt Vonnegut speak at Queens College, and that was the night my father died. So that was, there's some strange connection. As I came home, there was no internet, no phone, so I had seen him speak. And that's a portrait of my father, by the way, in World War II. My father lived in Williamsburg, part-time, you know, many places in New York. My parents were both born in New York, and my father fought in World War II at the Battle of the Bulge. And that's sort of a portrait his mother had made for her. I'm very connected to the past in some ways. I deal with the family archive as well. I'm really into organizing that and putting that into a book or something for the family. So I guess I'm an archivist in some ways by nature. I really like to organize and archives and stuff like that. So, I also keep some of my books here. This is all Black Garden, and these are some working copies to send out for Reddick editions. I have some open boxes here of our books. This is my sink I made back in the 1990s, a wooden sink, and I haven't been making prints for a long time, but I hope to make prints again. There's no running water here, and I have to go to the laundry room one flight up in order to have water. And then my enlarger is here, in the plastic, and this is the contact sheet maker I have, which is kind of old-fashioned. And so this is the system, but you see it's not really a working darkroom, and so this is the only place I have, and I have to then clean it up in order to start working again. And so we have, the Ashkenazi household, stuff down here, old sewing machines, old telephones, my father's World War II boots. In mid-90s, I don't know, maybe it was 97 or so, I was in Red Square, and there was a kind of repetition practice for the parade that was going to be in a week or so. And so I was just there, but I didn't really have film on me, and I shot my film. And then I see Kudelka from across Red Square, and we had met before, so we recognized each other. And he comes to me, and I said, hey, I ran out of film. And he has one roll in his shirt pocket, one roll of Tri-X, and he says, do you want this? And I said, you're Kudelka. You'll use that roll better than I will use it, so you keep it. And so, I don't know, we didn't see each other for some years, and then there was a Magnum party in New York, years and years later, and again, I see him from across the room, he sees me, he comes over to me, he says, you want to know? I said, okay, I'll take it now. So that he really remembers such things, like things. And this kind of camaraderie for me is very important in photography, about being friends, liking these people, liking photographers and their journeys and stuff like that. And that's one reason, again, why I like to publish their books, is that I want to see them succeed. I want to see their work, So, I would say these photographers, Klein, Kudelka, and Robert Frank, of course, as Bertien van Manen and other photographers. I don't know, there's lots of great, Anders Peterson, great photographers. So there's many, many really great photographers. But for now, we live in Istanbul. Sabia, my wife, is from Istanbul. That's basically where we live. My archive is here, and I can't do anything when I'm there. Sabia has lots of assignments. She's in the U.S. She's in Fargo or South Dakota, North Dakota now, and she's traveling. So she's doing her work. So again, we're doing together things and living our lives like that. And then she's flying lots of times going there. She's going to London next week. There's a show, exhibition, and then whatever. And she's working on her projects. I work on my projects. And, for instance, like Sabia shoots, and she's concentrating on more Islamic culture, conservative culture, headscarf wearing women, in her work, Hafiz. And then some Turk might come along who says, that's not what my country looks like. My country is modern. It's not filled with headscarves. But, Sabia chose to shoot that angle. So if someone comes to her and says, you're not showing our country properly, what can you say to that? It's like, I'm showing what I want to show. If you want to show something else, you go out and shoot it. She can't make a complete, overall fair picture of the entire nation, and that's not her point. So it's good that we have many perspectives. Sabia is shooting the religious side of life in Turkey, and other places. And another person is shooting modern things, and that's where the democracy of photography comes, is that you don't see it in one book, but you collect many books and it's just like reading a newspaper. You don't read only the New York Times, you read other things to get a different perspective on life, and from different viewpoints, and the same thing like that. I don't say that any book represents, any one thing. It's like I was talking about shooting in Gaza. I have a panoramic picture of guys carrying a big missile, in a training, like 3 meters long, and that's the picture I have from Gaza, but maybe I would have shot something else, but that's the picture I kind of liked. I was not showing to show them as bad people. That's not my point at all. Actually, I went to Gaza and they're amazing people, and I travel and I find amazing people everywhere and also bad people everywhere. So, I mean, the thing is to keep producing, to changing. I look at it in some ways like, instead of producing the same old album over and over again, like Neil Young, you morph and you change every time. He's a country singer, he's doing electronic rock, he's doing this, he's doing that. In some ways you're reinventing yourself over and over again. And that's maybe a lesson that Robert Frank taught us, is that once he did The Americans, even by the time that book was printed, he was not making books. He was doing films for many years after that. And only back years and years later did he come back to bookmaking with The Lines of My Hand. I mean, don't quote me on these things. I'm not a Robert Frank, thing. But as far as I know, I mean, he came back to photography, but a completely different way. He did not shoot The Americans again. He shot other things that were much more personal. So I'm in the process now of helping with my designer friend to see what we can do with certain projects. So actually there's one project I will make another trilogy somehow of color work under a pseudonym. So I wanted to not be Jason Eskenazi, the black and white photographer, who does like this, because I'm not just that, but I did do that, but that doesn't mean my creative abilities or imagination stays within the frame of a black and white picture, 35 millimeter. So I did a lot of other things, and I want to see how can I work those things. And for me, it's about just creativity and chance taking and doing things that are interesting, intriguing, to see, to show different aspects of myself, So I'm working on many different things, just to mine my archive, I need to in order to shoot. And why do I need to in order to shoot? For the simple reason, not doing it is much worse.
Wow.
So, yeah, well, I mean, if I try to analyze my own psychology, is that it's good to sit in a backyard and watch planes go over and make coffee and stuff. But again, you have to challenge yourself, you have to get out of your skin somehow. So if I was sitting in this backyard, for years, I would say, man, what did I waste all that time? I should have been doing something. So working, trying to make things gives us meaning. What meaning? I don't know, but at least you're trying to create some reason to engage in the world. Photography chose me back in high school, perhaps. That is your reason. That is your meaning. That I see pictures of the Berlin Wall falling down and I want to go there. I see pictures of stuff happening in Gaza. Yes, I want to go there at some point. I want to see that stuff. I want to go and witness it. So in a way that being a witness is important to me, but it's not a witness to prove a point. It's a witness to be alive. You have a limited amount of time on the earth. Some people have 1 year. Some people don't even get out of the womb. Some people live to 90. But you need to take a chance, and you need to experience things. You need to go on the journey, like Joseph Campbell says, the great teacher. You need to go on the hero's journey. You need to go out and pursue something, whether you're pursuing poetry, whether you're pursuing, making a film or something creative. We're meant to be creative beings. We're not meant to be sheep. We're not sheep. Maybe people were more or less sheep back, in the Middle Ages. They had no, they couldn't read. They couldn't leave their village. They couldn't, there were no images for their imagination. Maybe, we're graduating, to being a full human in some ways, of unlimited amounts of creativity. Let it dry.